The Great Hall of the Galactic Concord was the largest structure ever built by intelligent life, and it hung in the empty space between three star systems like a metal flower waiting to bloom. Ambassador Chen Weilin stood alone on the small platform assigned to humanity, and she watched as thousands of alien delegates filled the massive chamber around her, their bodies strange and their faces unreadable, but their intentions perfectly clear to anyone paying attention. Humanity had been part of this galactic government for only 63 years. And in that short time, they had made more enemies than any species in recorded history. Or so the elder races claimed when they thought humans were not listening. The Zendari were the first to arrive at their platform, their tall silver bodies moving with the grace of creatures who had ruled stars for 10,000 years. And their leader, High Arbiter Veltoric, looked down at the human ambassador with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. Chun did not look away, and she did not bow, and she did not show any of the fear that the Zendari expected from younger species. The Vorthon came next, their massive forms casting shadows across entire sections of the hall. And then the Kethviri with their floating bodies and their cold blue light. And then hundreds of other species that humanity had met only briefly in their short time among the stars. All of them had come to vote, and Chun knew exactly how that vote would go. The charges against Earth had been read 3 days ago, and they filled 17,000 pages of official documents, each one describing a different crime that humanity had supposedly committed against galactic peace and order. Illegal weapons research was the first charge, because humanity had refused to stop developing new technologies just because the Concord found them frightening. Unauthorized expansion was the second charge, because human colony ships had entered sectors that the elder races had marked as forbidden, even though those sectors contained resources that could save millions of human lives. Refusal to submit genetic records was the third charge, because humanity did not trust the Concord with information about their own biology, and history had taught them that such trust was rarely rewarded. But the real reason for this vote was none of those things, and everyone in the Great Hall knew it even if no one would say it out loud. 6 months ago, a human exploration vessel had found something in the Perseus Void, a region of space that the Concord had declared off-limits for reasons they refused to explain. The ship had been called the Wanderer, and its captain had been a woman named Sarah Okonkwo who believed that knowledge belonged to everyone, not just those powerful enough to hide it. What she found there had changed everything, and now the Concord wanted humanity gone before they could share that discovery with the galaxy. High Arbiter Veltoric raised his hand, and the hall fell silent with a speed that showed just how much power the elder races still held over this assembly. The vote on Resolution 7712 will now commence, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber through technology so old that even he did not fully understand it. The question before us is simple. Should the species known as humanity be exiled from Concord space, stripped of all rights and protections, and forbidden from contact with member worlds until such time as they demonstrate fitness to rejoin galactic civilization? Chun felt her hands tighten into fists at her sides, but she kept her face calm and her breathing steady. The Zendari voted first, as they always did, and their answer was yes. The Vorthon voted second, and their answer was also yes. One by one, the species of the Concord cast their votes, and one by one, the count against humanity grew higher and higher until it seemed like the entire galaxy had decided that Earth had no place among the stars. Chun watched the numbers climb on the holographic display above her head. 500 votes for Exile, then 1,000, then 2,000. Each one a species that had decided humanity was too dangerous or too annoying or too different to tolerate. A few species voted no, and Chun made sure to remember each one of them. The Malori with their gentle ways and their long memories, the Threshold Collective who valued new ideas above old traditions, and 10 others who saw something in humanity worth protecting. 424 species chose not to vote at all, their abstentions a cowardly middle ground that helped no one and meant nothing. The final count appeared on the display: 2,411 in favor of Exile, 12 against, and 424 abstentions. The Great Hall erupted in noise as thousands of delegates celebrated or argued or simply talked among themselves about what this vote would mean for the future. High Arbiter Veltorek raised his hand again, and silence returned. "The resolution passes," he declared, and there was no hiding the satisfaction in his voice. "Humanity has 60 cycles to remove all personnel and assets from Concord space, after which any human found outside the Sol system will be subject to immediate detention and—" "No," Chun said, and her voice cut through the hall like a blade through silk. The High Arbiter stopped speaking, and for a moment something like surprise flickered across his ancient face. "The human delegate does not have the floor," he said, but there was uncertainty in his words now. Chun smiled, and it was not a friendly smile, and it was not the smile of someone who had just lost everything. "I am not asking for the floor," she said, and she activated the recording drone that had been floating silently beside her throughout the entire proceeding. "I am making a statement, and the Concord can choose to listen or not. But they will hear it regardless." She turned slowly, looking at every section of the Great Hall, meeting the eyes of species that had just voted to cast her people into darkness. 63 years ago, humanity came to this place with hope, she began, and her voice was steady and clear. "We came with open hands and curious minds, and a genuine desire to be part of something greater than ourselves. We learned your languages and studied your histories and tried to understand why you built your civilization the way you did. And in return, you treated us like children. You gave us rules, but no explanations. You showed us wonders, but told us not to ask how they worked. You welcomed us with words, but rejected us with actions at every turn." High Arbiter Veltorek made a gesture that summoned security drones, but they had not yet reached the human platform when Chun continued. "We accepted this treatment because we believed that trust must be earned, and we were willing to earn it. But now you have shown us that trust was never possible, because you never saw us as equals to begin with. The Concord has made its decision, and now humanity will make ours." She paused, and in that pause the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. "You have 60 cycles to reconsider this vote. After that, we stop asking permission. After that, we stop pretending that your rules apply to us. After that, you will learn what it means to exile a species that refuses to be exiled." She stepped off the platform before anyone could respond, her footsteps echoing in a silence so complete that it seemed to swallow all other sound. The security drones parted before her as if they could sense something in her that made them afraid. And perhaps they could, because machines were often wiser than the creatures that built them. Chen Wei-Lin walked out of the Great Hall of the Galactic Concord, and she did not look back, and she did not slow down, and she did not stop smiling until she was safely aboard the last human ship in that sector of space. Then she allowed herself one moment of fear, one moment of doubt, one moment of wondering if humanity could really do what she had just promised. The moment passed quickly, and she gave the order to return to Earth. There was work to be done, and 60 cycles was not much time, but humanity had always been good at working under pressure. The stars blurred around her ship as it jumped toward home, and Chun thought about all the things that would have to happen before those 60 cycles ended. The Concord believed they had just removed a problem. They had no idea that they had just created one. The elder races of the Concord expected humanity to panic, and they prepared themselves to watch with satisfaction as the young species fell apart under the weight of their exile. They expected riots in the streets of human colonies, and they expected factions to form among human leaders, each one desperate to make a separate peace with the Concord. And they expected begging and pleading and all the desperate acts of a species that had just lost everything. What they got instead was silence. On the first day after the vote, human merchants in Concord space began closing their shops and settling their accounts, paying every debt they owed down to the smallest credit, and asking nothing in return except transport back to Seoul. On the second day, human engineers working on joint projects with Concord species finished their current tasks, documented everything they had done, and then quietly erased every personal file and private database they had ever created on Concord systems. By the 10th day, there were no humans left in any sector controlled by the Concord, and those who would watch them leave reported something strange. The humans had been calm, even cheerful, as if they were going home for a holiday rather than fleeing into exile. High Arbiter Veltorek received reports from his intelligence services, and he read them with growing confusion. "They are not fighting among themselves," his chief advisor told him, her silver face showing something that might have been concern. "They are not forming splinter groups or seeking individual arrangements with member species. What are they doing?" Veltorek demanded. "They are going home," the advisor replied. "All of them, without exception, are returning to their own system and then going quiet. Then they have accepted their fate." Veltorek decided, and he allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. Perhaps they are more mature than we believed. He was wrong, of course. And if he had known what was happening inside the Sol system, he would not have been satisfied at all. On Earth, the Global Council met in a bunker 3 kilometers beneath the surface of Antarctica. And every leader from every nation sat together in a room that had been built for exactly this purpose 50 years ago. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood before them, her uniform crisp and her eyes hard, and she told them what they already knew but needed to hear spoken aloud. "The Concord believes we are beaten," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the room. "They believe that exiling us will force us to accept their rules and beg for readmission in 100 years, or 1,000 years. They are wrong." She touched a control on the table before her, and a holographic display came to life, showing the Sol system in perfect detail. "For 63 years, we have been members of the Concord. And in that time, we have learned everything we could about their technology and their weaknesses and their fears. We learned that the elder races are powerful but slow, that they stopped innovating thousands of years ago because they believed they had already discovered everything worth discovering. We learned that they fear change more than they fear death, and that they will do anything to maintain the order they have built, even if that order no longer serves the species it was meant to protect. Most importantly, we learned about the Perseus Void and the artifact that the Concord has been hiding there for longer than humanity has existed." The holographic display changed, showing a region of space that looked empty but was marked with warnings in a dozen languages. Captain Sarah Okonkwo found this artifact 6 months ago, and she brought back something that the Concord never wanted anyone to find. Proof that their civilization is built on lies. Tanaka paused to let that statement sink in. The artifact contains records from the precursors, the ancient species that seeded this galaxy with life before vanishing 3 million years ago. The Concord has known about these records for 10,000 years, and they have been suppressing them because the truth would destroy their power. "What truth?" one of the leaders asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. "The truth that the elder races did not earn their position through wisdom or strength," Tanaka replied. "They were simply the first to find the precursor technology and the first to decide that no one else should have it. Everything they have, their ships, their weapons, their medical technology, all of it came from the precursors. They discovered nothing themselves. They built nothing themselves. They are not elder races at all, just thieves who arrived early. The room erupted in voices, some angry and some excited and some simply confused, but Tanaka raised her hand and silence returned. "None of that matters right now," she said. "What matters is that we have spent the last 6 months studying the precursor records that Captain Okonkwo brought back. And we have learned things that the Concord does not want anyone to know." The display changed again, showing schematics and designs that hurt the eyes to look at. Technology so advanced that it seemed like magic. The precursors did not just seed the galaxy with life. They left tools for that life to use. Tools that the Concord has been keeping locked away because they would make the elder races no more powerful than anyone else. We have built those tools. She touched another control, and the display showed what was hidden beneath the surface of Luna. Vast factories working around the clock, producing things that should have been impossible. On Luna, we have completed the Prometheus Array, a network of devices that can disable any Concord technology within range. Their weapons, their engines, their communications, all of it can be shut down with a single command. The display shifted to Mars, showing orbital shipyards that sprawled across half the planet's sky. On Mars, we have built a fleet, not the small defense force that the Concord allowed us to maintain, but a real fleet with real weapons and real capabilities. And on Europa, under the ice, we have finished the greatest project of all, a new kind of engine that does not use Concord technology at all, one that they cannot track or disable or understand. Tanaka looked at the leaders gathered before her, and she saw hope dawning in their eyes for the first time since the Exile vote. The Concord gave us 60 cycles to leave their space. We left in 10 because we had work to do at home. In 50 cycles, that work will be complete. And then we will show the galaxy what humanity can do. When we stop asking for permission, the elder races think they have contained us. They think that exile means we will disappear and trouble them no more. They have forgotten that humans do not accept limits. They have forgotten that we do not give up. They have forgotten that every time someone tells us we cannot do something, we take it as a challenge. She smiled, and it was the smile of a predator preparing to hunt. 50 cycles from now, the Concord will receive a message from Earth. That message will explain the new rules of the galaxy, and those rules will be ours, not theirs. If they accept those rules, there will be peace. If they refuse, she left the sentence unfinished, but everyone in the room knew what she meant. Far above their heads, in the shipyards of Mars and the factories of Luna and the hidden bases beneath Europa's ice, humanity worked without rest and without fear. They had been told they did not belong among the stars. They were about to prove just how wrong that judgment was. Every hour brought them closer to the deadline, and every hour made them stronger. And every hour the Concord remained ignorant of the storm that was coming. The elder races would learn soon enough. Humanity was not going quietly into exile. Humanity was preparing to make their rules clear. The 61st cycle began like any other day in the Great Hall of the Galactic Concord, with delegates arriving at their platforms and advisors whispering in the ears of those who held power. High Arbiter Veltorek sat in his place at the center of the chamber, reading reports about trade disputes and border conflicts and all the small problems that kept the galaxy of species from destroying each other. He had not thought about humanity in weeks, because there had been no reason to think about them. The humans had left Concord space exactly as ordered, and they had caused no trouble since their departure, and the whole affair seemed to be over. Some of the younger races had questioned whether exile had been too harsh a punishment, but Veltorek had silenced them with a simple reminder. Humanity had violated the most sacred law of the Concord by entering the Perseus Void, and that crime could not go unpunished. He was reviewing a complaint from the Kethviri about Vorthan ships crossing into their territory when every screen in the Great Hall went dark at once. The delegates fell silent, and then they began to murmur with concern. And then the screens came back to life with a message that would change everything. The face that appeared was human, belonging to a woman that some of the delegates recognized as Ambassador Chen Weilin, but she was not dressed as an ambassador anymore. She wore military black, and her eyes were cold, and her voice carried through the chamber with a clarity that cut through every whispered conversation. "People of the Galactic Concord," she began, "this message is being broadcast to every relay station, every embassy, every military installation, and every civilian communication network in Concord space. 60 cycles ago, you voted to exile humanity from your civilization. You gave us 2 months to remove ourselves from your presence, and we did so without resistance. Now we have something to say in return." The screen changed to show a document, written in all 2,847 member languages of the Concord. And Chun's voice continued as the words scrolled past. "Humanity acknowledges its exile from the Galactic Concord. We accept no further authority from your institution, and we recognize no laws, treaties, or agreements that we did not choose for ourselves, effective immediately. The following terms apply to all interactions with Sol System and human-controlled space. First, any vessel entering human space without authorization will be destroyed. There will be no warnings, there will be no negotiations, and there will be no mercy for those who ignore our borders." The delegates began to react, some with anger and some with fear and some with disbelief, but the message continued regardless. Second, the 12 species who voted against our exile are granted permanent diplomatic status with humanity. They may contact us freely, trade with us freely, and visit our space freely. All other species must apply for contact privileges through these 12 allies, and we reserve the right to deny those applications without explanation. High Arbiter Voltorek rose from his seat, his silver face twisted with rage, but there was nothing he could do to stop the broadcast. Third, the Concord's ban on FTL, communication disruption technology, is no longer recognized by humanity. We have developed this technology ourselves, and we will use it against any species that threatens us. Fourth, the artifact from the Perseus Void is now the sole property of humanity. Its contents will be released to the galactic community in 1 standard year, unless the Concord attempts to take it by force, in which case the information will be released immediately. The screen returned to Chun's face, and now there was something like satisfaction in her expression. This message is not a negotiation. This message is not an invitation to discuss terms. This message is a notification of facts that are already true. You exiled us because you feared what we might become. You were right to be afraid, but you were wrong to think that exile would contain us. We are no longer part of your civilization, and that means we are no longer bound by your rules. The galaxy does not belong to the Concord alone, and we will prove that truth to anyone who doubts it. This concludes our message. May your ancestors guide your decisions in the days to come." The screens went dark, and for a long moment, the Great Hall was completely silent. Then High Arbiter Voltorek spoke, and his voice shook with fury. "They dare to threaten us?" he demanded. "They dare to make demands of the Concord? They are one species, alone and isolated, and they dare to speak to us as if they were our equals?" He turned to face the assembly, and his words rang through the chamber like thunder. "This is exactly why we exiled them. This arrogance, this refusal to accept their place in the order of things, it proves that humanity is too dangerous to tolerate. I propose an immediate response, a peacekeeping fleet, sent to Sol System to secure the artifact, and to remind humanity that exile does not mean immunity from consequences." The Vorthan delegate rose to speak, his massive body blocking the light from 3 platforms behind him. "I support this action," he rumbled. "Humanity has made their intentions clear, And we must show them that the Concorde will not be intimidated. One by one, other delegates voiced their agreement, and within an hour, the decision was made. The largest military fleet assembled in 4,000 years would jump to Sol System's edge. 300 warships from 12 different species, carrying weapons that could crack planets and commanders who had never known defeat. They would secure the artifact, arrest the human leaders responsible for this defiance, and establish a permanent military presence around Earth to ensure that humanity never threatened the Concorde again. The fleet gathered at the rally point in just 3 days, because the elder races did not believe in waiting when their authority was challenged. Admiral Keffer of the Sindari stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, and looked at the tactical display showing 300 vessels ready to execute his commands. "Signal all ships," he ordered. "We jump to Sol in 1 hour. Standard formation. Weapons armed but silent until we assess the human defenses. Our mission is simple. Show humanity that their words mean nothing against our strength. Once they see what they face, they will surrender without a fight." His officers acknowledged the order, and the fleet began its final preparations. They did not know what was waiting for them. They did not know that every word of their communication had been intercepted by human listening posts. They did not know that Admiral Yuki Tanaka had been tracking their assembly from the moment the first ship arrived at the rally point. And they did not know that humanity had spent 60 cycles preparing for exactly this response. On Luna, technicians ran final diagnostics on the Prometheus array. On Mars, human warships powered up their engines and moved into formation. On Earth, Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin watched the enemy fleet on her own tactical display and smiled the same cold smile she had worn in the Great Hall of the Concorde. "They took the bait," she said to Admiral Tanaka. "They are coming to teach us a lesson." "Yes," Tanaka replied, and there was something like anticipation in her voice. "They are coming to teach us a lesson. We will be excellent students." The two women shared a look of understanding. The Concorde thought they were about to crush a rebellious young species. They had no idea that they were about to learn something themselves. The fleet jumped, and 300 ships vanished from Concorde space. The next time anyone heard from them, everything would be different. Admiral Keffer had commanded Sindari fleets for 300 years, and in all that time he had never felt doubt before a battle. The Concorde's enemies were always weaker, always slower, always desperate in ways that made them predictable, and victory was simply a matter of applying overwhelming force. So when his flagship emerged from FTL at the edge of the Sol system, he expected to see a frightened young species scrambling to defend their homeworld against impossible odds. What he saw instead made him question everything he thought he knew. The tactical display lit up with contacts, and the numbers kept climbing until they seemed impossible. "Report," he ordered, and his voice came out calmer than he felt. "Sir, we are detecting over 3,000 weapons platforms in orbital defense positions around the inner planets," his sensor officer replied, and there was fear in her voice. "That is 10 times more than our intelligence indicated. The human fleet is also present, numbering approximately 200 warships in formation at the system's edge." "That is impossible," Keffer said. "They did not have the resources to build such defenses. They did not have the time." "Sir, there is more," the sensor officer continued. "The weapon signatures do not match any known human technology. We cannot identify what kind of systems they are using across the Concorde fleet." Similar conversations were happening on every bridge, as commanders who had expected an easy victory suddenly realized that something had gone terribly wrong. A human vessel broke formation and approached the Concorde fleet, moving slowly and broadcasting a signal that requested communication. Keffer accepted the hail because he needed to understand what he was facing. The face that appeared on his screen belonged to a human woman in military uniform, and she looked at him with the steady gaze of someone who was not afraid. "Admiral Kethfer of the Sindari flagship Eternal Judgment," she said, and her pronunciation of his name was perfect. "I am Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Earth Defense Fleet. Welcome to Sol System. You are welcome to leave the same way you came, and if you do so within the next hour, no harm will come to you or your crews." Kethfer felt anger rise in his chest, because this human dared to speak to him as if she held any power at all. "You are in no position to make demands," he replied. "The Concord fleet carries enough firepower to reduce your entire system to debris. Surrender the Perseus artifact and submit to Concord authority, or face the consequences." Admiral Tanaka smiled, and it was the smile of someone who knew something that her enemy did not. "Admiral, your intelligence is 6 months out of date," she said. "A great deal has changed. Humanity was exiled from the Concord. I suggest you take a closer look at your tactical display and ask yourself whether you really want to test our defenses." Kethfer looked at the display again, and this time he noticed something that sent ice through his veins. The human fleet was not running, not scrambling, not showing any of the panic that inferior species always displayed when facing Concord might. They were waiting. They were positioned in a perfect formation that covered every approach to the inner system, and they were waiting as if they wanted the Concord fleet to attack. "You are bluffing," Kethfer said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Your technology cannot match ours. Your numbers cannot save you." "Perhaps," Admiral Tanaka replied. "Or perhaps we have spent the last 60 cycles learning secrets that the Concord has kept hidden for 10,000 years. Either way, you will have your answer soon. You were warned not to enter this system. You came anyway. The consequences of that choice are yours to bear." The transmission ended, and Kethfer was left staring at a blank screen. He should have withdrawn then, should have ordered his fleet to retreat and report what they had found. But 300 years of easy victories had made him incapable of believing that any species could threaten Sindari might. "All ships, advance to attack formation," he commanded. "Target the human fleet and prepare to—" He never finished the sentence. The lights on his bridge flickered and died, and then came back on a moment later at half their normal brightness. "Sir, we have lost FTL capability," someone shouted. "The jump drive is completely offline. Weapons are not responding," another voice reported. "All primary and secondary systems have gone dark. Communications with the rest of the fleet are down. We cannot reach anyone outside visual range." Kethfer looked at the tactical display, which was still barely functioning on emergency power, and he saw the same thing happening to every ship in his fleet. 300 warships, the pride of 12 species, all of them going dark at the same moment. The human fleet had not fired a single shot. "What have they done?" Kethfer whispered. The answer came a moment later, when Admiral Tanaka's face appeared on his screen again, this time on an emergency channel that somehow still worked. "Admiral Kethfer, you and your fleet are now disabled," she said. "Your FTL drives, your weapons, your communications, your tactical systems, all of them have been shut down by the Prometheus array. You cannot repair them because the damage is not physical. Your systems simply no longer work, and they will not work again until we allow them to. You are not prisoners, and we are not going to destroy you. Instead, we are going to send supply ships to each vessel in your fleet, providing you with food, water, and atmosphere recyclers sufficient for a long journey. Then you are going to leave Sol System the only way still available to you, at sublight speed." Kethfer felt his blood run cold as he understood what she was saying. Without FTL, the journey back to Concord space would take decades. His crew would grow old on this ship, watching the stars crawl past at a pace that made distance meaningless. "You cannot do this," he said. "This is a war crime." The Concorde will respond with everything it has. The Concorde can do whatever it wants in its own space, Admiral Tanaka replied. "But this is our space now, and in our space, our rules apply. We could have destroyed your fleet. We could have killed every being on every ship and scattered your atoms across this system. Instead, we chose to let you live and give you time to think about what has happened here. Use that time wisely, Admiral. Use it to ask yourself whether the Concorde was right to exile us. Use it to wonder what else we have learned from the precursor archives. Use it to consider whether your leaders should have listened when we warned them not to come here. By the time you reach home, the galaxy will be a very different place. We hope you will find a better role in it than the one you play today." Human ships began approaching the disabled fleet, and they carried supplies just as Admiral Tanaka had promised. There was nothing Kethver could do but accept the help and begin the long, slow journey back to Concorde space. As his flagship drifted toward the edge of the system, he looked back at the human defenses and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. Humanity had been exiled because the Concorde feared they were dangerous. Now he knew that the Concorde had been right to be afraid, but wrong to think that exile would solve anything. They had not removed a threat. They had created an enemy with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. And that enemy had just demonstrated that the rules of the galaxy had changed forever. The eternal judgment crept toward home at a fraction of light speed, and Admiral Kethver had nothing but time to wonder what humanity would do next. News of the Concorde fleet's defeat spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Carried by whispered transmissions and terrified messengers and the simple, unstoppable power of a story too important to contain. The greatest military force assembled in 4,000 years had been disabled without a single shot fired. And the species responsible was one that the Concorde had just voted to exile as unworthy of galactic civilization. In the Great Hall of the Concorde, High Arbiter Veltaric stood before an assembly that had lost all faith in his leadership. "We must respond with overwhelming force," he insisted, but his voice no longer carried the authority it once had. "We must gather every ship from every member species and crush humanity before they can." "Before they can what?" The Mallory delegate interrupted, and her soft voice cut through his words like a blade. "Before they can disable another fleet? Before they can release the precursor archives that you have been hiding from us for 10,000 years? The hall erupted in chaos, because the secret was out now, and everyone knew that the Concorde's power had been built on lies. The Sundari did not earn their position through wisdom, the Mallory continued. They were simply the first to find the precursor technology, and the first to decide that no one else should have it. We have seen the human broadcasts. We have heard the truth. Other delegates rose to speak, and their words were angry, and their questions had no good answers. How long had the elder races known about the precursor archives? Why had they hidden this knowledge from the rest of the Concorde? What else had they suppressed to maintain their power? Veltorek tried to restore order, but order was beyond his reach now. The Concorde did not collapse that day, but it cracked in ways that could never be fully repaired. Far from the chaos of the Great Hall, Ambassador Chun Wei-Lin sat in a conference room on Earth, meeting with representatives from the 12 species who had voted against humanity's exile. "We have a proposal," she said, and her voice was warm now, nothing like the cold tone she had used with the Concorde. "We want to build something new, not a replacement for the Concorde, but an alternative to it. An alliance built on different principles: mutual defense, shared research, and absolute respect for each member's sovereignty." The Mallory delegate leaned forward with interest. "What would you call this alliance?" she asked. "The Soul Compact," Chun replied, "because it begins here, in this system that the Concorde tried to isolate. Because every great journey has to start somewhere, And we have decided to start with the species who showed us kindness when kindness was rare. The 12 delegates looked at each other, and something passed between them, hope perhaps, or the beginning of trust. The precursor archives, one of them said. You promised to release them to the galaxy. Will you share them with the compact first? Chun nodded. We will share everything we have learned, without restriction and without cost. The precursors left their knowledge for all life in the galaxy, not just for those who found it first. Humanity has no interest in making the same mistake the elder races made. We want partners who can grow alongside us, not subjects who depend on our permission. One by one, the 12 delegates agreed to join the Soul Compact, and a new power was born in the galaxy. The years that followed were years of change, unlike anything the Concord had experienced in its long history. Humanity released the precursor archives exactly as they had promised, broadcasting the information to every corner of the galaxy where receivers could catch the signal. Species that had been considered primitive suddenly had access to technology that the elder races had hoarded for millennia. The power structures that had defined galactic civilization for 10,000 years began to shift and crack and transform. The Concord tried to adapt, but adaptation came slowly to institutions built on the assumption that change was the enemy. Some member species left to join the Soul Compact, drawn by humanity's promise of equality and shared growth. Others remained but demanded reforms, using the precursor knowledge as leverage against leaders who could no longer claim superior wisdom. The elder races fought back with every tool they had, but their greatest tool, the monopoly on advanced technology, was gone forever. Within a decade, the Soul Compact had grown to include 47 species, and it continued to expand year after year. Within a century, it was the dominant force in the Orion Arm. Not because it conquered anyone, but because it offered something the Concord never had, a future where every species could reach their full potential. And humanity? They became something that the galaxy had never seen before, a young species that led not through force or fear, but through the simple willingness to share everything they had. They built schools where the children of 100 species learned together. They founded research stations where scientists from former enemies worked side by side. They created trade networks that brought prosperity to worlds that had been poor for thousands of years. And everywhere they went, they told the story of the Exile vote, not as a wound that needed vengeance, but as a lesson that should never be forgotten. Every human child learned about the day the Concord voted against them. They learned how Ambassador Chun had stood alone in the Great Hall and refused to show fear. They learned how Admiral Tanaka had disabled an entire fleet without taking a single life. They learned that exile only works if you have nowhere else to go, and that humanity always finds somewhere else to go. The crippled Concord fleet finally reached home decades after their defeat, and by then, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. Admiral Kethfer had grown old on his ship, watching the stars crawl past and thinking about everything that had happened. When he finally stood before the remnants of the Concord leadership, he had only one thing to say. "We were wrong," he told them. "We were wrong about humanity, and we were wrong about ourselves. We thought we were the guardians of galactic civilization, but we were only its jailers. The humans showed us mercy when they had every reason to destroy us. They gave us time to think when they could have given us death. I have had decades to think, and I understand now what they were trying to teach us." He paused, and his old eyes were wet with something that might have been regret. Power that is hoarded becomes weakness. Knowledge that is hidden becomes ignorance. Authority that is demanded instead of earned becomes tyranny. Humanity knew this from the beginning, and we exiled them for trying to remind us. Now they lead an alliance that welcomes everyone who wants to grow. While we cling to the ruins of an empire built on secrets and fear, we made our choice, and we must live with the consequences. But I hope that our descendants will be wise enough to make different choices that might one day earn us a place in the civilization that humanity is building." He walked out of the chamber without waiting for a response, and he spent his remaining years writing a history of the Exile vote and its aftermath. That history became required reading for young Sundari, a reminder of what happens when arrogance replaces wisdom. And far away, on a blue planet orbiting a yellow star, humanity continued to build. They had been told they did not belong among the stars. They had proven that the stars belonged to everyone. The galaxy had voted to exile Earth, and humanity had made their rules clear. Those rules were simple. Share what you have, help those who need it, and never let anyone tell you that your dreams are too big. The vote to exile humanity had passed with overwhelming support. It was the best thing that ever happened to the galaxy.